Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for this event in the Prove They Are Alive campaign. This is a really rare opportunity to focus on Turkmenistan, which is one of the most closed countries probably in the world, certainly in post-Soviet space, with a lot that always remains murky. It's very difficult to obtain exact information about what happens inside, and it takes a lot of focused attention and expertise to be able to follow it and to just learn about what's going on, never mind to try to craft a strategy for improving things and bringing about even small incremental changes. So we're really honored and grateful to have this panel who are all long-term observers, analysts of the situation in Turkmenistan and have tremendous expertise and knowledge that, again, is not easy to obtain. We'll first hear from Rachel Denber, who's the Deputy Director of Eurasia and Central Asia for Human Rights Watch. Then from Kate Waters, who's the Director of Crude Accountability, which is a environmental organization and civil society organization that works in Central Asia. And then we will hear from Tatyana Shikhmuradova, whose husband, Boris Shikhmuradov, has been in prison in Turkmenistan for over 10 years, since 2002. And we'll hear about her efforts to try to learn about his situation and try to obtain his release. Then we'll hear from Janice Helwig, who is policy advisor with the U.S. Helsinki Commission, and prior to working with the U.S. Helsinki Commission here in D.C., she was in Vienna and also worked with OSCE mechanisms there, and she'll talk about OSCE mechanisms, including specifically the Moscow mechanism, which was employed with Turkmenistan in the past, and how that may be a way of addressing the situation. Finally, Jim Beigus, who is the director of this region for DRL, who also will speak. The State Department has been very supportive of this campaign and the effort to try to learn about the prisoners, and he'll speak about U.S. efforts in this area. So thanks to everyone, and we have a really big and rich lineup, so we'll try to start. And Rachel, please, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Janice, I actually don't need your watch because there's a clock right there. So I'll try to be very, I'd like to be very brief. Sorry? Talk into the microphone. Okay. Okay. Now it's on. Thank you so much, Miriam. I'm really very, very happy to be here to speak at this important panel. It's always extremely important to use every opportunity that we have to draw attention to Turkmenistan because it is surprisingly still a rather obscure country. I mean, the degree of its obscurity is probably matching the degree of its repression, which is very unfortunate. We need to find every opportunity to shed light on what is happening there. So, and this is a very important opportunity to do that. I thought that I would start by, I'd like to paint a broad picture of what Turkmenistan is all about, what the country is like in terms of human rights, so that we can all better understand why it's necessary to have this Prove They Are Alive campaign. And even though I know that that Kate will describe the campaign, I think that and what it's all about, I think that I need to say just in 2 sentences what the problem is before I go on to describe how it is that problem could actually exist in any country. And the problem is that since the early 2000s, dozens of people have, and possibly more, have simply disappeared in Turkmenistan's prison system. What does that mean? That means, what does it mean when a prisoner simply disappears? It means that that there is no official information about him or her whatsoever. It means that family members haven't had any letters, haven't had any family visits, haven't been able to successfully deliver packages. It means that basically family or friends haven't seen these prisoners since their arrest or since their trial. That should shock the conscience. That's a forced disappearance. That's an atrocity. We know of several dozen cases, and those are just the cases that we do know about. So you have to step back. Let's step back and start to think about what kind of government fosters this kind of situation where people can just disappear into the prison system, and what kind of government can simply refuse for more than a decade to provide any information about individuals' health, whereabouts, or welfare to loved ones. And let's think about how it could be that a government would even refuse to acknowledge whether these people are dead or alive. What kind of government can do that? I think that, unfortunately, many people, while many people have no trouble identifying what kind of government North Korea is, when you hear the term North Korea, I think most people in the world automatically identify it as one of the most closed, totalitarian, murderous governments in the world. But when you say Turkmenistan, as I said when we first started out, I think most people really don't know what we're talking about. Present company, of course, excluded. So I think that it's even people who are very worldly, have a clear idea about world politics, they just sort of scratch their heads and say, "What? Who? Where? Oh, that's the place with the dictator and the gold statues that rotated to always be in the sun," or something like that. So I think to the degree that there was knowledge about Turkmenistan, it was really the bad publicity or the scandalous publicity that now deceased President Sapar Murad Niyazov's cult of personality garnered. The country was mostly associated with the excesses of that personality cult, with the statues, with the months named after Niyazov's family members and the like. But I think it's important to note that Turkmenistan is one of the most repressive countries in the world, even if there isn't kind of the North Korea excesses of mass shootings and the like. The government rules through a climate of fear. The vast majority of people who have disappeared into the prison system are former government officials. They are, in many cases, high-ranking ones, or they're public figures. The governing system, it's a system of governance through ruthless and constant harassment, blackmailing, bullying of public officials, in which prison can often be the exit interview. And it's a system in which the criminal justice system is used routinely at various levels of the government to deal with rivals, to deal with critics, to deal with whether they're perceived or whether they're real. And in many cases, this system of persecution relates not only to the perceived rival or the perceived rival or threat, it relates to their whole family. So there's definitely a system of collective punishment. I want to say a couple words about a false opening. After Niyazov died in 2006 and was replaced with Berdi Muhamedov, there was a very brief period when people thought that there could be some change, but these hopes were very, very quickly dashed, and Turkmenistan just sort of fell into a black space, an empty space. On the one hand, Berdi Muhamedov started to seek more external contact, and there has been a lot more diplomatic and business activity than there ever was during Niyazov. So there's a revolving door of diplomats and businessmen from all over the world going to Turkmenistan, and you see Berdi Muhamedov actually traveling, something Niyazov never did, very rarely did. So there's and there are you see the Turkmen government more engaged in processes, which is good. It's a positive thing. It's not a bad thing that there's an annual human rights dialogue between Turkmenistan and the EU. Does it make change? Well, no. But it's not a bad thing that it happens. It's not a bad thing that it's a good thing that Turkmenistan was reviewed by the UN Human Rights Council under Universal Periodic Review. It's a good thing for sure that Turkmenistan has started to file reports to the UN treaty bodies. So that engagement has come since Niyazov has died, but too much, an awful lot has not changed. This is it's still a government. This is still a system that is ruled in the way I described before, through bullying, harassment, blackmail, and prison. There is no independent, no mechanisms for independent scrutiny inside the country. Berdi Muhamedov presides over a government that simply does not allow, does not tolerate even the most mild criticism, not within its own ranks, and certainly not from beyond those ranks. There's no critical journalists, no independent media, no criticism through the media, no independent non-government organizations. It is just unthinkable. There are a number of activists who operate very, very much under the radar and who are able to get information about the human rights situation and share it and get it to the outside world. But they really do that at their own peril. And the rare journalists, the reporters who do work with foreign media outlets are really doing it at their own risks. And just about every year, there's another case of a stringer, of a local reporter who's been arrested, who's been threatened, who's been harassed. I just want to say about NGOs. I mean, everyone relies on NGOs to get information, to systematize reliable information about the human rights situation, reliable information about what's going on inside the prisons, reliable information about political prisoners and processes. That's extremely difficult in Turkmenistan because, well, for the reasons I just laid out, the government doesn't tolerate any criticism or scrutiny. Also, unregistered NGO activity is criminalized in Turkmenistan, so you can actually go to jail for running or working with an unregistered NGO. I'm trying to just finish up now. This is also an environment where there's absolutely, in addition to there being no freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, there's also no freedom of religion. There are severe limits on it, both on the practice of Islam that's outside the realm of kind of the official state-run, mosques, the muftiyat, and also certainly for Protestant, Baptist, and other religious confessions that are not controlled by the government. There's also little external scrutiny of Turkmenistan. International monitors don't fare any better in terms of access to the country than domestic monitors. There are no fewer than 10 United Nations special rapporteurs, or monitors basically, who are still awaiting invitations from the Turkmen government for a visit. Human Rights Watch hasn't been able to enter Turkmenistan since 1999. And when we did go, the last time we did go, our researcher was kicked out. Amnesty International hasn't been there for a very, very, very long time. And so the problem is where there's no scrutiny, there's less information. And when there's less information, there's less calling to account. One more sort of atmospheric about Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan is one of the countries that still retains, it's one of the countries that actively bans people from traveling abroad. For several years now, Turkmen migration authorities have prevented people from leaving the country either because, mostly when these people are relatives or family circle of exiled political opposition leaders or members, or family members of exiled human rights activists, or family members of just inconvenient people, or inconvenient people themselves from inside the country. And we just had a case of this just this month in April. The brother of an exiled human rights activist wasn't able to leave the country. They think nothing about just pulling people off of airplanes. One thing that I think distinguishes Turkmenistan from a place like North Korea is the public mobilization factor. So you don't have the same level of mass rallies for the leader as you do in North Korea, but in Turkmenistan they do happen. And Berdimuhammedov Muhammadov is creating a cult of personality, and whenever he travels anywhere in the country, the people do have to come out. And this is also a flashpoint for repression and harassment. God forbid if you don't go, or if you don't behave yourself when the president is visiting. I think I might sort of stop there in terms of the big picture before we hand off to Kate. I just want to say 2 words about how it is that the people who are who have disappeared into the prison system, how they actually got there. Many of them belong to a group of people who were arrested in mass arrests in 2002 after a so-called assassination attempt against then President Niyazov. There was a lot of discussion, debate, questions raised about whether this really was an assassination attempt. What happened was his motorcade was, in fact, this is something I think perhaps Tatiana should talk more about because she remembers it a lot. I think she has a more direct memory of it than I do, but President Niyazov's presidential motorcade was allegedly was stopped, intercepted, and something happened. Nobody really knows what. People who witnessed it said that it looked like they thought that they were filming a movie because it looked very staged. So as a result, this became the catalyst for mass arrests and of people who were suspected of being involved in this assassination attempt. It was a time when when a couple of opposition leaders were talking about some change in the country. Dozens of people ended up being tried in. I don't even want to call them trials. It's difficult to call them trials. They were proceedings that were just a mockery of the word trial and a mockery of justice. Perhaps one that was the most that stands out the most was that against Boris Shikhmuradov, and I'll let Tatiana talk about that. So many of the people who are in prison today have disappeared into the prisons today were people who were arrested because of their alleged connection to this supposed assassination attempt, or because they are family members of people who were allegedly connected to this supposed assassination attempt. It's very important. The government denies that by refusing to provide information, by refusing to engage with the relatives, the government is denying that these people are in custody, even though they clearly are in custody, and that is one of the most prominent features of a forced disappearance. It is an atrocity, and I think that the reason why the Prove They Are Alive campaign is so important is that it is literally speaking truth to power, literally saying to the government, all we want to know is, where are these people? Are they dead or alive?
Great, thank you. Thanks for that overview, and we'll turn to Kate, who will speak more about the Prove They Are Alive campaign. Great. Well, first, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and for hosting this event. We're really pleased to have this opportunity, and of course delighted that Tatiana Shikhmuradova can be with us today, and that we have a chance to hear from her directly how this has impacted her family. But what I want to talk about briefly is the campaign itself, on what we're doing with the campaign, why it started, what our goals are, and to offer some recommendations to the international community on how to be involved, and sort of what to ask of and demand from the Turkmen government, which has been silent on this issue for far, far, far too long. The campaign itself, the Prove They Are Alive campaign, was launched in September of last year, and it was launched by a group called the Turkmenistan Civic Solidarity Group, which is a platform of 54 human rights organizations from countries around the OSCE region. And we're seeking to basically uncover the truth about the fate of dozens and perhaps hundreds, we haven't yet uncovered all of the names, of people who, as Rachel was saying, have just disappeared into Turkmenistan's prisons as the result of these mass arrests that took place actually in several waves starting from the early 2000s. So the wave that most people are, I think, who are aware of Turkmenistan are aware of is this November 2002 alleged assassination attempt and alleged effort to overthrow the government. But prior to that, there were other waves of repression where people who essentially had been good government employees, good members of society, people who had, as one of the family members I spoke with recently said to me, she said, you know, my father spent his entire career serving Turkmenistan. And when it wasn't convenient anymore for the president to have him on staff, he was one of those who was arrested and disappeared and is in prison as far as we know to date. So these are some people who voiced opposition or maybe were so competent at their jobs that they were a threat to the president, who clearly suffered from some kind of severe paranoia. But there were waves of these repressions, and part of what our campaign is trying to do is to understand, first of all, who these people are, what they did, what their biographies are, who their families were, what happened to them, and what they were officially charged with, because that's also not always clear. Most of the people who are in prison, a vast, vast majority, there's maybe one or two exceptions of these dozens and hundreds of people, have not had any access to their families. They have not had access to lawyers. They are not allowed to receive packages or letters. They're not allowed access to medical care. They're not allowed access to any kind of legal representation, and neither are their families. So they've been really in isolation for this past 10 plus years. But even given all of that information, the Prove They Are Alive campaign, we're not asking the Turkmen government to give these people fair trials. We're not asking them to call them political prisoners. We're not asking them to commute their sentences even. We're basically asking a very simple question, which is prove they are alive. We just want to know, are these people still living? If they are, where are they? And then to get access to them, to medical care, to their lawyers, and to their families. Because not only have they, in many instances, been tortured and abused, but this is torture and abuse for their families to be in isolation and silence from their loved ones for so many years. So the way that we're doing this, as I said, is to first and foremost is to try and gather information, to do the research. And we have a team of researchers who has been gathering written information both in English and in Russian, and when it's available in Turkmen, but also interviewing family members, interviewing people who may have come in contact with some of the disappeared while they themselves were in prison. There is a very small number, but there are some people who have amazingly managed to make it out of the prisons and out of Turkmenistan, and we are talking with those people as well as talking with families. So we want to essentially document this event, this horror that has been undocumented and purposely undocumented, so that these people are remembered. So I want to just give a very, very brief history. As Rachel described, you know, President Niyazov was Turkmenistan's first president, and he completely and totally suppressed dissent, and he eliminated all voices of opposition. Civil society was completely undermined and destroyed by the early 2000s. Independent journalism, non-existent, and any political opposition had been completely destroyed by the end of 2002 when all of these events kind of culminated in the alleged assassination attempt.
And right after that, in 2003, the government of Turkmenistan changed its NGO law, requiring that all civil society organizations in the country re-register. And not surprisingly, virtually all of the organizations who then went with their new documents to register their organizations were denied registration, which, as Rachel indicated, meant that if they continued to work, they were working illegally. And initially that was considered to be a criminal offense. It was then reduced to an administrative fine. But the damage had been done, and a civil society that I don't think we can call vibrant and thriving, but certainly existed and was doing very interesting work, was completely squashed at that point. So the folks who are left inside the country for these past 10 years, who have been continuing to do human rights work, civil society work, trying to report independent news, are doing it completely underground, most of them with aliases, and at great personal threat and at great risk to their families as well. And this went along with, of course, these fabricated cases that Rachel mentioned, where people were forced to confess. Many of the biographies that we have, it's very clear that people were given psychotropic drugs, tortured, and then made these confessions on television about what they had done. And the sad part of all of this is that when President Berdi Muhamedov, or one of the sad parts of this whole thing is sad, when President Berdi Muhamedov came to power in 2007, he had an opportunity to distance himself from all of this. But that was his chance to stand up to the world and say, we're going to be a different Turkmenistan, we're going to be a different government, we're going to talk about these people who've been disappeared, we're going to start over. And instead, he continued this legacy of closed, brutal, torture-based legal system, if you can call it that, and continued to hide all of the information that exists about the people who are in prisons. So those of us who are involved in the campaign, and we are, as I mentioned, a large coalition of organizations, believe it's time to stop. It's time for the Turkmen government to speak about what has happened to those who have disappeared in the prison systems. It's time for the Turkmen government to join the community of nations abiding by international human rights standards, and it's time to stop the suffering of the families of those who have disappeared into the prison systems, and to speak truth about what's happened to those people. So as part of the campaign, we've addressed the OSCE. We were at the Human Dimension meeting in October of last year in Warsaw. We had representatives at the Parliamentary Assembly meeting in Vienna in February. We had representatives at the meetings that were held in Geneva in March. And we've brought family members and we've brought members of the coalition to each of these meetings to speak with the international representatives about how they can help us. And I have to say we've been really thrilled with the support that we've received in large part from the OSCE in particular. We've also addressed the United Nations. The Shikhmuradov family has come to the Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances, and we're working with other families to get them to either go to those working groups or to the Working Group on Torture or arbitrary detention. And we've also written to the Turkmen government. We wrote to Boris Shikhmuradov, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, asking him to agree to meet with us. Not surprisingly, he has not responded to our correspondence, but we waited a number of months before we went public with that letter, and then when we didn't hear from him, we decided that it was time to go public with our request of him. And all of these documents and all of this information is available on our website, which is just provetheyarealive.org. And on that website, and also in a stack in the back of the room, we have compiled the biographies of those people who we've been able to find information about. It's a work in progress, but I invite you to help yourself to that information. We've also been working with the United States government. We're really pleased to have the State Department here today represented, and we've also been very encouraged by the outspoken stance that that the U.S. government has taken on this issue, and we hope to be able to continue cooperating and following on the work of Professor Emmanuel Decaux, who in 2003, and Janice is going to speak about this, issued a report in keeping with the OSCE's, what's called the Moscow Mechanism, which is a way of trying to get OSCE member states to comply with the requirements. So I won't go into that because Janice is going to talk about it. But what I'd like to end with is to put forward a few recommendations that were initially in the recommendations, in part that Professor Decaux put forward in 2003, but also have sort of developed out of those ways that we think the international community can begin to really put some pressure on Turkmenistan. And most of these recommendations are within the confines of intergovernmental and international institutions, but we also think that the public and civil society in general have an important role to play. So one of the things we believe is that the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE should consider establishing a working group on Turkmenistan and identify a personal representative who's to the chair of the OSCE's Parliamentary Assembly who would look at human rights in Turkmenistan. Secondly, we think the Parliamentary Assembly should adopt a resolution on Turkmenistan at its 2014 summer session, which will be held in Baku, I believe, and or alternatively adopt a resolution on enforced disappearances and abductions in the OSCE region overall, specifically looking at the cases of Turkmenistan and then other countries like Belarus and Ukraine. We believe that members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, including the United States, should urge their governments to put questions to the government of Turkmenistan on the status of the disappeared, the state of investigation of the cases of enforced disappearances, and also request political visits to political prisoners. The Avadan-Depa prison, which is where most of these prisoners are allegedly being held, is a really horrifying place by all accounts, including having these what are called hunchback cells, which are about 1.5 meters tall, so people can't even stand up in them. And we believe that the international community has the obligation and the right to see all of that. And finally, we would like to ask the U.S. government to continue to raise the issue of the disappeared, both publicly and privately. We know that there's been a lot of private diplomacy, and we believe that that's absolutely critical. But making these statements publicly is equally important, if not more important, so that the Turkmen government understands that we're demanding publicly that they speak about this issue. And we also think that other international and humanitarian organizations can play a role. The OSCE, obviously the United Nations, but even groups like UNESCO. So thinking creatively about what kind of organizations can get into the country. So our hope is that through engagement, cooperation, and discussion, the Turkmen government can be brought to the table to talk about the fates of the disappeared. And this would be an ideal outcome, but we also understand that for the past 12 years, this has not happened. The Turkmen government has failed to come to the table. So we're prepared to go public and to have a very large, widespread civil society campaign where we make a lot of noise. And that's where we're headed with the campaign if we don't begin to see some results from the Turkmenistan government. So I'll stop with that.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And we'll turn now to Tatyana Shikhmuradova, who she'll be speaking in Russian, and there'll be translation. So thank you.
Уважаемые господа, дорогие коллеги, прежде всего я хочу поблагодарить всех присутствующих за то, что вы проявили заинтересованность и нашли время для того, чтобы встретиться с нами. Также я искренне признательна за возможность выступить и прошу вас извинить меня за недостаточно хорошее знание английского языка и за то, что я вынуждена прибегнуть к помощи переводчика. Спасибо.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I want to thank you for that you have expressed your interest and found time to meet with us. I'm also very grateful for this opportunity to present my case and ask you to forgive me for my insufficient knowledge of the English language. Thus, I need a translator, an interpreter.
Я начну с рассказа о том, как я получала американскую визу в консульстве Соединенных Штатов Америки в Дубае, где я в то время находилась. Эта обычная рутинная процедура превратилась для меня в настоящую пытку.
First of all, I would like to tell you the story of how I got my U.S. visa at the U.S. consulate in Dubai, where I was staying at the time. This is a very basic routine procedure, but for me it turned into a torture.
Не поймите меня превратно, сотрудники консульства отнеслись ко мне в высшей степени доброжелательно и корректно.
Don't get me wrong, the colleagues at the consulate, the workers at the consulate, were very kind to me and treated me with a lot of professionalism and correctness.
Дело в том, что я не смогла ответить на вопросы, касающиеся моего мужа. Где он живет, где он работает, когда я видела его в последний раз. И, наконец, в конце беседы меня спросили, а вообще я замужем или я не замужем?
The issue at hand was that I couldn't answer the questions that they were asking me about my husband, where he was, where he worked, when I saw him at the last time. And then at the end, they even asked me if I was married at all.
Для того, чтобы объяснить, почему я не знаю, где находится мой муж, с которым я состою в браке более 43 лет, вероятно, надо было рассказать о том, когда и как он попал в Туркменистан, как он работал там, как он строил отношения с Ниязовым.
In order to explain why I don't know where my husband is located, and my husband with whom I am married for over 43 years, I needed to explain to them the story of who he was, how he was a Russian-based journalist and a diplomat who ended up in Turkmenistan, how he worked at the embassy, and his close ties with Niyazov when in the situation.
Когда в 1992 году по приглашению Ниязова Борис Шихмурадов приехал в Ашхабад, то фактически с нуля началось формирование внешней политики независимого Туркменистана.
In 1992, when Boris Shikhmuradov came to Ashgabat, that was the beginning of the formulation of the external politics of the country.
Но в 2001 году он подал в отставку и возглавил оппозиционное народное демократическое движение Туркменистана.
But in 2001, my husband Boris Shikhmuradov, he retired from the foreign service and started the National Democratic Party of the opposition.
Ранним утром 25 ноября 2002 года в Ашхабаде произошло так называемое покушение, которое все здравомыслящие люди назвали чистой воды инсценировкой, как это театрализованное покушение обернулось вполне реальными репрессиями, арестами и пытками.
Early morning on the 25th of November 2002 in Ashgabat happened the so-called assassination attempt on President Niyazov, which all rational and kind of politically minded people called a staged event, and but the staged event turned into a quite real process of torture and arrests and detentions of a mass amount of people, repressions.
Приношу глубокую благодарность профессору Эммануэлю Деко за полный объективный анализ событий, который он дал в докладе, подготовленном в рамках запущенного московского механизма ОБСЕ. И очень сожалею, что его рекомендации остались невыполненными.
We are all very grateful to Professor Emmanuel Decaux for his very thorough and objective analysis of the events, which are compiled in his report within the framework of the Moscow mechanism of the OSCE. And it is very unfortunate that his recommendations have yet been realized.
Хочу подчеркнуть, что профессор Деко предупреждал нас. Всякое промедление будет означать не просто моральное отречение от случившегося, но и коллективное соучастие в нем. Поэтому моя особая благодарность инициаторам акции «Покажите их живыми», которые ставят перед туркменскими властями вопросы соблюдения, незамедлительного соблюдения норм международного гуманитарного права.
I just want to highlight Professor Decoe's warning that any delay in taking action would not only be a moral abdication, but also a collective complicity. For this reason, I am particularly grateful to the partners of the campaign Prove They Are Alive, which puts the questions of the international norms in front of the Turkmen government. And about humanitarian rights.
Разгул беззакония, граничащий с геноцидом, попрание прав и свобод граждан, произвольные задержания, огульные обвинения, взятие в заложники жен и детей – вот неполный арсенал туркменских стражей правопорядка.
Complete lawlessness, which borders on genocide, disrespect for the rule of law and the fundamental freedoms of the citizens of Turkmenistan, arbitrary detention and forced disappearances, taking into arrest the wives and children of those that they are in prison. This is the arsenal of the Turkmen government's Стражи порядка. This is their arsenal of enforcing the rule of law, so to speak.
Беспредел, царящий в те дни в Туркменистане, многими зарубежными обозревателями и политиками назывался возвратом в мрачную эпоху сталинизма.
The state of affairs, which in those days presided in Turkmenistan, was called by many international observers and politicians as a return to the grim epoch of Stalinism.
Через 3 дня после ареста туркменское телевидение показало запись так называемых признательных показаний Бориса Шихмурадова, в которых он называл себя и своих товарищей мафией и наркоманами, а Ниязова называл даром небес.
3 days after the arrest, the Turkmen television showed the so-called forced confessions of Boris Shikhmuradov and others, where Boris Shikhmuradov called himself and his colleagues the mafia and drug addicts, and President Niyazov as the gift from the gods.
Всего 3 дня потребовалось туркменским следователям на то, чтобы превратить человека в робота. В те же 3 дня было завершено следствие по 2 десяткам статей Уголовного кодекса Туркменистана, было проведено судебное заседание и вынесен приговор – 25 лет лишения свободы. Все это уложилось в 3 дня.
It just took 3 days for the Turkmen prosecution to turn a human being into a robot. In these 3 days, the courts concluded their proceedings for over 24 of articles of the Criminal Code of Turkmenistan. The court proceedings ended, and there was a sentence of 25 years imprisonment.
Мне доподлинно известно, что официально предоставленная Шихмурадову женщина-адвокат доступа к материалам следствия не имела, а со своим подзащитным до суда виделась всего 1 раз. После вынесения приговора она отказалась от контакта с родственниками, вскоре вообще она исчезла, и никто не знает, где она находится.
I also know that the officially provided lawyer to my husband did not have any access to the court documents and met with her client, my husband, only once. After the termination of the court proceedings and the handing out of the sentence, she refused any contact with us, the relatives, and then just disappeared.
Мне также известно, что судья, оглашавший приговор, был отправлен на работу в отдаленный район Туркменистана и на 8 лет внесен в черные списки людей, которым запрещен выезд за пределы Туркменистана.
I also know that the judge who presided over the hearings was sent to a faraway region of Turkmenistan, and for 8 years was put into the blacklist of Turkmenistan, of all the citizens that are not allowed to leave the country.
30 декабря 2002 года 3000 делегатов и гостей внеочередного заседания Халк Маслахаты Народного совета Туркменистана приняли участие в сеансе массовой истерии, организованной Ниязовым.
On December 30th, 2002, over 3,000 delegates and guests of the extraordinary session of the Halk Maslahati, the National Council of Turkmenistan, took part in kind of a session of mass hysteria, which was organized by Niyazov.
На большом экране вновь были продемонстрированы признательные показания Шихмурадова и других участников так называемого покушения, после чего на трибуну в лучших традициях сталинских судилищ стали подниматься представители общественности, требовавшие для этих людей смертной казни.
On a large screen were again demonstrated the so-called forced confessions of Boris Shikhmuradov and other participants of the so-called assassination attempt, after which, in the best of Stalinist traditions, several delegates took the tribune, and they were representatives of so-called civil society, asking death for these people.
Особо хочу отметить, что одним из ораторов был нынешний министр иностранных дел Туркменистана Рашид Миредов, профессиональный юрист, выпускник Московского государственного университета, который в то время занимал должность директора Туркменского государственного института демократии и прав человека.
I also want to highlight the specific fact that one of these orators from the so-called civil society asking for the death of these people was the current Minister of International Affairs of Turkmenistan, Rashid Miredov. He's a professional lawyer. He graduated from Moscow State University, and at that time he was serving as director of the Turkmenistan Government Institute for Human Rights and Democracy.
По предложению Ниязова делегаты заседания единогласно приняли постановление об объявлении моего мужа и еще нескольких людей изменниками Родины и применении к ним исключительной меры наказания пожизненного заключения.
By Niyazov's wish, the delegates of this session unanimously decided to call my husband and others accused, traitors of the country, and took extraordinary measures to them and gave them life sentences.
Это постановление предписывало Генеральной прокуратуре, Министерству национальной безопасности и Министерству юстиции Туркменистана разработать специальное положение о порядке отбывания наказания приговоренных к пожизненному заключению. Однако мне неизвестно, было ли разработано это положение, потому что никаких следов этого документа обнаружить не удалось.
And this special decision required that the Prosecutor General, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Ministry of Judicial Affairs of Turkmenistan had to develop a special procedure regarding the life sentences of these special cases. Although I am not aware of any special procedures that were developed, and there was no hints of such procedures that I could find.
Хочу обратить ваше внимание на следующее нарушение юридических норм, допущенных в отношении моего мужа и других приговоренных к пожизненному заключению. Постановление Халк Маслахаты о применении этой меры наказания было утверждено Ниязовым только 3 февраля, а заседание состоялось 30 декабря. То есть до 3 февраля оно не имело законной силы.
I just want to also highlight the fact that there was also a violation of judicial procedures that were in regards to my husband and others imprisoned into life sentences. At first, the procedure of the Halk Maslahati was signed by Niyazov only on the 3rd of February 2003. even though it was decided upon on the 30th of December 2002. This means that until the 3rd of February 2003, it did not have any legally binding strength.
И второй важный момент. Конституционный закон о халк маслахаты и его полномочиях объявлять людей изменниками Родины и решать вопрос о применении к ней исключительной меры наказания в виде пожизненного лишения свободы был принят 15 августа 2003 года. То есть на момент принятия постановления в полномочия халк маслахаты это не входило.
Another important moment, the constitutional rights of the Halk Maslahate and its empowerment to call people the traitors of Turkmenistan and decide the questions about them serving life sentences was adopted only on the 15th of August 2003. This means that at the moment of adoption of this procedure, the Halk Maslahate did not have that within its rights and powers.
И, наконец, третий момент. Люди, первоначально приговоренные к 25 годам заключения, были повторно приговорены, на этот раз к пожизненному заключению. Таким образом, был нарушен основополагающий закон правосудия, закон, ухудшающий положение граждан, обратной силы не имеет, а также не был соблюден принцип разделения властей.
And the third moment, the people that were initially convicted to 25 years imprisonment were convicted in the second round again for life sentences. In this way, there was a violation of the principle of due processes, meaning that anything that worsens the status of a citizen does not have a kind of a backwards strength, if that makes sense.
Приговор был вынесен представительным органом, полномочия которого в соответствии с Конституцией Туркменистана заключались лишь в принятии решений о целесообразности того или иного действия. К тому же, и это отмечал в своем докладе профессор Деко, все обвинения были построены исключительно на признательных показаниях обвиняемых.
The sentence was carried out in the представительный орган, the representative body, which, in relation to the Constitution of Turkmenistan, only has the rights to adopt decisions about the legality of one or another action. Alongside this, and Professor Deco mentioned this in his report, all of the accusations were founded exclusively on the confessions of those being accused.
Мне удалось найти официальный документ МИД Туркменистана, направленный 29 апреля 2004 года на имя генерального секретаря ООН, в котором, в частности, говорится, что к осужденным на пожизненное заключение в соответствии с законом и приговором суда доступ запрещен в течение 5 лет.
I was able to find
этот документ.
I was able to find a document, an official document from the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Turkmenistan, which is dated the 29th of April 2004, which is addressed to the General Secretary of the UN, which in part discusses that those convicted in life sentences do not have access to, cannot be granted access to their families and such within 5 years.
Этот срок давно истек, но не только доступа, но и какой-либо информации об осужденных по-прежнему нет. И мне кажется, что пришло время об этом напомнить туркменским властям.
These 5 years have long ended, and we have had no access to the imprisoned and no information whatsoever about their whereabouts or conditions. I think it's time to remind the government of Turkmenistan about this document.
Люди, осужденные пожизненно, находятся фактически вне правового поля, и с ними можно делать все, что угодно, как, впрочем, со всеми остальными политзаключенными, которых, как утверждают туркменские власти, в Туркменистане нет.
Those imprisoned for life are factually outside of the legal system. The government of Turkmenistan can do whatever it wants with them, as well as really with all other political prisoners, which officially do not exist in Turkmenistan.
Результат этого беззакония налицо. Более 11 лет я ничего не знаю о судьбе моего мужа. Туркменская сторона не отвечает ни на мои обращения, ни на призывы правозащитных организаций Красного Креста, игнорирует решения Генассамблеи ООН, рекомендации ОБСЕ и комитетов ООН.
As a result of this, I know nothing about my husband for over 11 years. The Turkmen government never responds to not my appeals, not the appeals of international organizations or the Red Cross. It ignores the decisions of the General Assembly of the UN, of the recommendations of the OSCE, of various committees of the UN.
В таком положении находятся семьи других осужденных по так называемому делу 25 ноября. В Туркменистане они, к сожалению, уже начинают забывать, чему немало способствует политика нового президента. Однако, как отмечал в своем докладе профессор Деко, постоянный нейтралитет Туркменистана не должен стать фиговым листком постоянных нарушений прав человека.
This is not just my situation. All of the families of those imprisoned for the so-called November 25th events have no information about their relatives as well. In Turkmenistan, unfortunately, the people are beginning to forget, which falls very well with the politics of the new president. But as Professor Deco states in his report, the neutrality of Turkmenistan should not become a fig leaf for the constant violations of human rights in the country.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That was absolutely harrowing. If we can move on now to Janice, we'll talk about OSCE mechanisms, and I guess there's something with the word Moscow and OSCE that might actually be a source of hope and possible moving forward for us.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think we've heard a lot about the situation in Turkmenistan, about what has happened, and then the very real need for the families to know what's happened to their loved ones. So I think the question we have is, what can we do about it now? What have we been doing, and what can we do in the future? What leverage do we have? And I think that's really a very difficult question, but I'll talk a little bit about what's happened in the past and some ideas about what we might be able to do in the future. I'll talk a little bit about what the OSCE has done and a bit about what my own congressional commission has done. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Helsinki Commission, our mandate is to follow the countries that participate in the OSCE and whether they're fulfilling their commitments under the OSCE, particularly in the human dimension. And that's why we have a particular connection and interest to the OSCE. And as Miriam mentioned, I was working as the Commission representative on the U.S. delegation to the OSCE back in 2002 and 2003 when this happened. So I can tell you a bit about what the Moscow mechanism is and what happened and how we might use it going forward. There's a misconception that in the case of Turkmenistan, the Moscow mechanism didn't work. And I believe that's not true. I think it did exactly what it was meant to do. What the Moscow mechanism is, it's called Moscow because it was agreed in a meeting, an OSCE meeting in Moscow. So that's why it has that name. It's a human dimension mechanism under which, when there is a serious human rights concern, there's two phases. First, a country can simply ask another OSCE country for written information about whatever the issue is. In this case, the United States was the first to invoke that part of the mechanism, and that was in December 2002. Turkmenistan did respond with written information in that case. If it is not deemed sufficient, then 10 OSCE countries can invoke the second part of it, which is a rapporteur mission and report, which is what Mr. Deco, who you've heard mentioned, did. The way that mechanism works is there's an existing expert list, so the experts are supposed to be unbiased and objective. The 10 invoking countries get to choose a rapporteur from the list, and the country concerned gets to choose a rapporteur from the list. And the only step that Turkmenistan did not do is they did not choose a rapporteur. So Mr. Decaux did the report on his own. Turkmenistan also didn't let him into the country. Just as a point of interest, if anybody wants to know what who the 10 countries were, it was Canada, the United States, Germany, Austria, the United Kingdom, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Norway, and Sweden, who invoked it at the time. Mr. Decaux's report, I think, still stands today. You can find it online. The government of Turkmenistan was given an opportunity to comment on it, and you will find their own rebuttal attached to Mr. Decaux's report. There was a discussion of it in Vienna. That's what's supposed to happen under the mechanism. The OSCE Permanent Council is supposed to discuss the rapporteur's report for further action, because that's really the point. Is you have a report, you have recommendations. That's where the mechanism stops. It's then up to the OSCE states, the governments themselves, to figure out, okay, what are we going to do to implement these recommendations? Foreign Minister Muradov himself came to that discussion in Vienna, which a lot of people don't remember, but he did. As has already been mentioned, I think that several of the recommendations that Mr. Decaux put forward are frankly still completely valid. Just to give you an example, they included establishing rule of law, building an independent judicial system, allowing NGOs to work throughout the country, and in particular, conducting an urgent investigation into the conditions that those detained were being held and to give them new trials. What's interesting is that more than 11 years later, we're not even talking about most of these anymore. What we're really only talking about is a very humanitarian concern for the family members and for the fate of those in prison, to simply show if they're alive or not. In terms of the OSCE, the issue does continue to be raised in the OSCE. The United States raises it at the OSCE Human Dimension Implementation Meeting in Warsaw every year under a very special item at the end of the meeting as follow-up to the Moscow mechanism. Tatiana, her son Boris, have also come to the HDM and spoken. Foreign Minister Muradov was in Vienna a couple months ago in the Permanent Council. I will say I think many countries were a little too diplomatic with him in his appearance, but it's still certainly raised in an OSCE context. What could happen now is not really re-invoking the Moscow mechanism, but I think you still have it, you still have the report and the valid recommendations, and it's still possible for any of the countries, particularly the 10 that invoked it, to continue to work together to press the government of Turkmenistan, and that's certainly what I would like to see. Just to mention a few things that our commission and our Congress have done on this. Our members have been very engaged in this, actually even before 2002, in concerns on human rights in Turkmenistan, but since 2002 have written numerous letters to President Niyazov, to Muradov, to President Berdy Muhammadov, have not gotten any real answers. They've raised it personally, in person, with Foreign Minister Muradov when they've met with him. I did find a very interesting one response we got from Foreign Minister Muradov back in 2005, where he, and I'm quoting, says, "The Turkmen side officially informs that all places of detention are open to visits by the representatives of the international organizations and foreign diplomats, and they are given free access to all convicted persons in accordance with international rules." He goes on to say that those who were convicted in connection with the November 25th, 2002 events would have to have Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkmenistan accompany any visits. But as much as we've tried to take him up on this offer, 9 years later, we still haven't, but we still certainly will continue to try. We've held several hearings and briefings on the issue. In 2006, 3 of our members, Mr. Smith, Mr. Pitts, and Mr. McIntyre, introduced a resolution on human rights in Turkmenistan in the House. And they certainly need to keep raising the issue. I'd certainly be interested if anybody in the audience has any thoughts as well on further actions. I'm very interested. Thanks.
Very much. And now James Bigas from DRL will also speak about it.
Yes, thank you very much. The United States remains committed to working to bolster respect for human rights in Central Asia. The region itself is diverse, and our approach to advance respect for human rights and democratic values is often calibrated for individual countries and situations. On the whole, however, we have repeatedly underscored to governments in the region that the scope of our bilateral and regional cooperation with them is constrained by serious human rights concerns, and we see the need for swift and meaningful reforms to address them. And of course, this includes raising the issues of political prisoners directly with the governments and in multilateral fora, and talking about them publicly. As we draw down from Afghanistan this year, we know that the changing landscape in the region has piqued anxieties over possible instability and the United States' broader commitment to Central Asia. We're reviewing our policy approach to Central Asia to ensure it responds appropriately to changing regional dynamics. But one thing is fixed. It remains an abiding strategic interest of the United States to see a secure, prosperous, democratic region encompassing Central Asia, where the rights of all people are respected, can be freely exercised. Specifically on Turkmenistan, it's where we have faced some of the most acute and intractable human rights challenges, and where our interests are the most limited. We are concerned about, as you know, the overall lack of transparency in the government, the judicial process, marred by arbitrary arrest and detention, denial of due process and fair trials, reports of torture and mistreatment. Prisoners of conscience are particularly vulnerable to these abuses in states like this, where authorities use security forces and the power of the courts to eliminate their political rivals. And we believe the fundamental freedoms of individuals and all citizens of Turkmenistan should be protected. The ongoing denial of individuals' freedom of expression, association, religion, assembly, right to due process hinders the development of democratic institutions and free civil society. The Prove They Are Alive campaign first came to our attention last year, and we've appreciated the sustained and focused advocacy of this campaign on the very important issues of due process and political prisoners in Turkmenistan. At the annual bilateral consultations held in Ashgabat last January, members of the U.S. delegation specifically asked the government of Turkmenistan to respond to the Prove They Are Alive campaign's request for information about the whereabouts and conditions of people being held within the prison system. In our bilateral meetings with government officials and in multilateral fora, we regularly press the government of Turkmenistan to honor their international obligations and OSCE commitments to respect human rights, including the freedom of expression, association, assembly, movement, and religion. The U.S. government also continues to request that the government of Turkmenistan extend invitations to the UN special rapporteurs who have requested to visit Turkmenistan. There are 10 outstanding requests, some of which have been lingering for over a decade, which include special rapporteurs on torture, freedom of association, assembly, freedom of opinion, expression, also judges and lawyers. Independent monitoring of human rights conditions is vital to fostering open and transparent environments necessary for strengthening civil society. The U.S. Embassy in Ashgabat monitors information available about prisoners of concern and has engaged with the government at the highest levels on these cases on many occasions. The embassy also regularly makes official requests for amnesty for these individuals and for humane treatment of those in detention. Now, I can't really talk about the details of diplomatic discussions, but I can generally characterize the response of the government of Turkmenistan as not responsive. And we will continue to raise these issues and look for new openings to incentivize progress. And I think your plans for the campaign to bring more attention to the issue, especially on the Hill, I think these are moves that can help your cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I think it's extremely important for the U.S. that when Kate started this campaign at the OSCE meetings, it was endorsed by the U.S. delegation very quickly, very forcefully. And it's, we're grateful that you're able to raise it and speak about your private meetings publicly as well. I think that's encouraging. Let me pull out a couple of themes, and we'll take questions as well. I thought Janice's question to you all that we'd be grateful for ideas as well is also interesting. So thoughts and comments and questions from the audience are very welcome. But there are a couple of things that I noticed. One is I thought Tatiana's account of what had happened to her husband is I think she correctly characterizes as a Stalinist. I don't think that's an exaggeration. The show trial, forced confessions, public hysteria, pseudo representatives of the public asking for public executions. And unfortunately, we're seeing this in some other places in the region as well. It would be nice to think of it as limited either in time or in space. But the May Day parade yesterday, if anybody noticed in Moscow, was also hearkening back to some of the similar themes. Another point is, of course, that it seemed that there was an opportunity for change when Niyazov was replaced by Berdimuhamedov. But that has not come, and particularly in this campaign, if the focus are people who were arrested in 2002 under a previous president, you would think that that would provide some leverage, but it so far hasn't. So the system has a way of replicating itself even when the president passes away, and that has some very depressing connotations for elsewhere in Central Asia, where we see presidents getting older, and there's hope that once they are replaced, there might be openings, but Turkmenistan speaks of the opposite, that the system just puts someone similar in place and in fact continues to hold the secrets of the previous government and remains faithful to them. And then on international, that it's so difficult to have leverage over a regime that is rich in gas. It exports the gas mainly through Russia and China. So there's not a lot of leverage to be had there. And that leaves us really, it's not a member of like European institutions, it's in Central Asia. So the only international mechanisms are going to be through the OSCE and maybe through the UN. I don't know if anyone, it sort of hasn't come up. The OSCE has been the major mechanism, the Moscow mechanism. So that leaves us with sort of few options and ways of working there. But there is the possibility of taking existing reports and pushing further with them. I don't know if there are questions. I'm not sort of seeing hands. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you so much, organizing such a wonderful event. It's indeed very rare to have such event on Turkmenistan. My name is Jasmine Cameron. I work at ABA Center for Human Rights, and our project provides technical legal assistance to human rights defenders around the world, and we have a special focus on Central Asia. We do work in every country in Central Asia except for Turkmenistan for obvious reasons. In Kyrgyzstan, for example, it's easy to pick up the phone and get in touch with human rights defenders. In Kazakhstan, similar. In Tajikistan, and even we work in Uzbekistan. But in Turkmenistan, it's a special case. Kate, I'm very impressed with what you're doing, your campaign, and you, at the end of your speech, suggested, provided with recommendations on what civil society can be doing at the level of OSCE. My question is, do you have any recommendations or comments of what NGOs can be doing in Turkmenistan, taking into account that we don't have as much as leverage as, for example, OSCE has, or U.S. missions or other missions, but what we do have is, small level capacity, providing technical assistance. So if you have any comments or suggestions on that.
Thank you very much for your comment, and I think Rachel might have some thoughts on how civil society can be involved as well. I mean, Turkmenistan is a really difficult place to work, as we all know. But I think one of the biggest problems for civil society activists who are still working inside Turkmenistan is the isolation that they experience. The fact that groups like Human Rights Watch, like Crude Accountability, all of our organizations can't get into the country to work there means that the opportunities for interaction are very small. So my recommendation would be for an organization like yours, for example, if you're working in other countries in Central Asia, to invite Turkmens, to work through the existing networks, and there are people who can be identified, invite them to other countries. It's much easier for a Turkmen human rights activist or lawyer or journalist to get to Almaty or to get to Bishkek than it is to come to Europe or even to come to Russia. So thinking about ways of providing opportunities that aren't inside the country but that allow for contact and engagement and just listening to people, and being willing to keep those groups small so that this question of trust, I mean, inviting somebody to a meeting with 50 other people isn't going to be very successful, but working in small groups with small, kind of groups of colleagues who trust each other or have the opportunity to maybe build some of that trust, that would be something that I would recommend. Rachel, if you have.
No, I think that's an excellent suggestion. I don't have anything to add to it except the need for, I would just emphasize the trust factor.
Yes.
Because
yes.
these, the activists who do work the activists who do some of the most difficult work in Turkmenistan, the ones who are working on, who are trying to expose human rights violations, really, like I said in a couple of minutes ago, do so at their own peril, and there's a tremendous amount of, there's huge risks that they face. So if you were, I think that Kate's suggestion is a fantastic one. I would just emphasize the need to be extremely careful. There are secure ways of getting in touch with these kinds of people, though. There's also, I wouldn't rule out reaching out to numbers of other civic activists who aren't necessarily doing the most controversial work, like documenting human rights violations, but who are still involved in other civic activity, even though it is probably, controlled by the government or heavily scrutinized by the government. They're not exposing violations, but they're providing legal services. I think that there are a number of lawyers who are trying to do their jobs. We encountered it when we did some work on the forced evictions and demolitions and expropriations of people's property to make way for, parks and things like that. And, there are lawyers who were engaged, who families hired to try to help them get to get something kind of compensation for their property. I'm just giving this as an example. There are lawyers who are working there, who are working on issues like evictions or working on other issues that are actually human rights issues. That was a big human rights violation. There are lawyers who work with families in distress. There are lawyers who work with families who are having trouble getting welfare payments. You might want to reach out to those groups of lawyers and I guess like social workers. They might be extremely reluctant, understandably so. But and I think that there are also international programs working with these kinds of lawyers, so you can look into those as the kind of conduit.
Sure.
I just wanted to add one OSCE issue. I think as most of you all know, the OSCE does have a small mission in Ashgabat. Because the OSCE is an intergovernment organization, Turkmenistan does have some control over it and what it does. It can, of course, kick it out at any time. So it has to be a bit careful, but I would say especially on sort of technical assistance side, some of the things that have been already discussed, I think the OSCE is active both in Turkmenistan and in the region, also inviting people from the region, and you might reach out and see what they're doing. I know they've been conducting some trainings for judges, for example. I know that that probably the majority of issues that the mission complaints, I guess, from individual citizens that the mission has received has been exactly what Rachel just talked about, the property expropriation issues. So they are active on some things like that.
Chris, please.
You've all described very eloquently how difficult it is to work within the countries in Central Asia, first and foremost Turkmenistan, and how difficult it's been for international institutions like the OSCE and Western governments in the US, Europe. I'd be curious to know whether you see opportunities outside of these countries, and I raise this based on an article that's just been published in the last couple of days by Alex Cooley and John Heathershaw in OpenDemocracy.net. They essentially describe how the market for politics in the Central Asian countries domestically has been pushed beyond these countries' borders. And what's happened in turn is that these governments have used the rule of law to pursue their political opponents. So they use diplomatic pressure, they use financial instruments to freeze the assets of these political opponents and dissidents. They use rendition-related tools. So they're in essence playing on the Western countries' turf now. And so if you stipulate that it's very difficult to work within Central Asia because of energy security imperatives or terrorism-related imperatives, what should the United States and the Europeans be doing to more actively contest this objectionable behavior of these regimes beyond their borders, which clearly is growing? This is part of a larger phenomenon. The OSCE has been hit so hard in recent years, basically the hollowing out effort by the Russians and others in the human dimension, the ODIHR. So what's missing beyond these countries' borders, and what could be done to play a little bit harder on the democracy's turf?
Okay, thank you. Do you want to?
I haven't yet read that article, but this is a very interesting thesis. I'll give a stab at responding to you. I think there are a couple of things that are really, really important in taking on this type of an argument, and they involve specifically having more teeth. There's the form of democracy, and then there's the actual substance and meaning of it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I can give an example from Turkmenistan where Berdimuhamedov actually put into law legislation saying that only 20% of the revenues from the hydrocarbon have to come into the government. 80% of hydrocarbon revenues are off budget, and that's the law. That's perfectly acceptable. They go into the ministry or into the Agency for Hydrocarbon Development, which is under his direct leadership, and it never has to make it into the budget. So the letter of the law is that they're playing by the rules. But I mean, it's an illegitimate law. It's an illegitimate use of power. It's an illegitimate use of authority. And I think that there has to be some kind of ethical, moral response to, if not to that specific law, to laws like that and to the use of law like that on the international level that says that doesn't comply, that doesn't meet the international standard for human rights, that doesn't meet the international standard for normal economic development or whatever. I mean, I think that's the tough place that we are, is that we have to say those are not the rules, actually. That's actually not the way the game gets played. And to look at the substance of it, and when the Turkmen government, for example, says we have just modernized our hydrocarbon law, or we have just come out with a new NGO law, we've improved that, not take that at face value, but actually really, really look at it. And I think that gets back to the previous question too, which is that using data and information and research, we need to actually not forget about these countries and do the work and the research to understand on our own terms what this change means, not what the Turkmen government or the Turkmen Ministry of Oil and Gas or whatever explains to us, this is what the truth is, but to actually do our own research and do our own information finding. AAAS, which is represented here, did a fantastic report a year ago where they used satellite imagery to demonstrate that there had been an ongoing oil spill in the Caspian for 12 years. The Turkmen government never talks about that. It's not somebody's opinion. That oil leak exists. You can look at it. So we can do the same kind of research and the same kind of information gathering, whether it's the rule of law, whether it's human rights, whether it's economics, whether it's science, and call them on it. And I think we have to do it.
I just said two things. First, I think that it's, I think civil society organizations can demand transparency of institutions that are, the recipients or holding funds, like the oil revenues, or what's it called? Yeah.
Oh, it's stabilization fund.
Stabilization fund, thank you. So, if I'm sure that the Turkmen government isn't keeping all the funds from monies from the stabilization fund inside Turkmenistan, that's probably salted away in a foreign bank account somewhere, right? So, I mean, if it's salted away in a government in a country whose government has certain transparency requirements, I think civil society organizations can demand demand transparency. That was done a number of years ago, back when Niyazov was still alive, when the stabilization fund was being held by the Deutsche Bank, and I think it still is being held by Deutsche Bank. So there should be some transparency there. Another thing, another prong that you talked about was the international, like how these governments are kind of internationalizing or globalizing their pursuit of their opponents through things like Interpol, through things like extradition and renditions and things like that. Well, that's a field where I think we have a lot. We as human rights organizations have a lot more, I think, leverage and a much clearer legal basis for demanding non-compliance with the extradition requests, because they almost always are now involving serious risks of human rights violations. We saw that with Ablazov. This is not Turkmenistan, but we saw that with the Ablazov case in France, which is still going through the courts. And we have a very important role to play in cases like that, and both in
making recommendations to foreign governments about these extradition requests or rendition efforts, exposing them, and the like. And also, so there's renditions, and also there's one more prong, Interpol, right? I think a lot more can be done in ensuring that there are mechanisms in place so that the red flag warnings that Interpol, puts on people's, the red flag warnings that Interpol issues that in order to get people stopped by border control, that there needs to be some kind of mechanism to ensure that that's not just a pass for one Central Asian authoritarian government to deal with its political opponents.
Thank you. There's a question there from Kathy Kosow.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Ned for this week having 2 events on Central Asia, and Turkmenistan was briefly mentioned at the event we had on a few days ago, at which we presented our new reports from our annual report relating to all the countries of Central Asia, including, of course, Turkmenistan. I wanted to mention that it seems to me that in line with what is being discussed, and the 80% of the oil wealth, or gas wealth rather, of Turkmenistan disappearing presumably into the president's pockets or somewhere around him, that really sanctions of an economic nature of officials who have specific oversight over, say, prisons or Ministry of Internal Affairs, where they, have the professional, governmental, official responsibility for what's going on in the ministries they oversee, should be adopted by many countries, including our own. Presumably, you're right that most of the ill-gotten gas gains from Turkmenistan I guess are still held in Deutsche Bank. I'm not sure that's true. I've been told they have been dispersed somewhat, but never mind. And that leads me to the point that the commission where I work, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, for those of you who haven't heard of it, and I hope you go to our website and look up our new reports on Central Asia, Russia, Belarus, and Azerbaijan. And we also have detailed prisoner lists for both Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan. They're exclusively of Muslims who have been imprisoned for the peaceful practice of their belief. But that leads me to the point that the Commission has long recommended that Turkmenistan be named a country of particular concern, which under the IRFA Act, International Religious Freedom Act, which was passed 15 years ago, there are a specific set of policy responses which are then set into motion if a country were to be named a country of particular concern. The State Department and the White House have never named Turkmenistan a country of particular concern. If it were to finally do so, it would then initiate either a series of detailed discussions, private discussions with the government, detailing a specific set of steps that should be taken by the government to get it off the CPC list, but it also includes the possibility of economic sanctions of various kinds. Hence, I really feel quite strongly that individuals in the officials in the Turkmen government should be subject to specific sanctions if they oversee this grotesque prison system, which I can't remember which specific international organization has pointed out that Turkmenistan has one of the highest rates in the world of incarceration. I mean, America's not a great country to talk about that, but that's another issue. I made a lengthy comment here, but I would appreciate responses, especially from Jim. Thank you.
Jim,
well,
do you want us to?
Yes, the State Department at any time can make a determination on the CPC designation, and that certainly would involve, or rather trigger these discussions, both private discussions and public discussions. That's certainly something that's within the power of the State Department to decide. I can't really talk about specific decisions at this time, but that's certainly a possibility. It certainly would bring a lot of attention to this particular issue, and if that decision were made, as you described, a lot of these steps could be put into place.
No country of anywhere in the world has been named a CPC under this administration, under the Obama administration. So in other words, this mechanism as part of IRFA has fallen fallow, you might say.
Okay, I think there are two questions here. Start.
Hi, Jonathan Drake from AAAS. I believe I recall reading that several years ago, an official of the Turkmenian government was cornered and asked about the status of these prisoners and claimed that as far as he knew, they were still alive. I was wondering if anyone could comment on whether they believe that statement has any credibility whatsoever, and whether or not that is the case. Do we think that he knew when he was answering that question?
I think he's talking about, I think, Berdy Mukhomedov, right?
You're talking about the Columbia?
Yeah, I believe it was at Columbia, yeah.
Can you describe the incident too? What happened? He was speaking at a university and some students forced him to answer questions?
He was speaking at Columbia University, and there was a question from the audience about, we have the exact quote in here, did Berdy Mukhomedov know whether, particularly I think he asked about Batyr Berdiev and Boris Shikhmuradov, and were they still alive? This was in February 2007, and he said, as far as he was aware, they were still alive. That's the only, as far as I know, the only public statement that we have from the Turkmen government about the status of either Mr. Shikhmuradov or Mr. Berdiev. The legitimacy of the claim, or how real it is, I don't know. Maybe Tatiana, может, у вас есть какая-то информация по поводу Берди Мухомедова?
Я знаю о том, что президенту Берди Мухомедову был задан этот вопрос, когда он находился в Колумбийском университете. Дело в том, что немножко неправильно трактовали его ответ. Он сказал, я не уверен, он сказал, я верю, что они живы. То есть, может быть, да, а может быть и нет. Я верю, ну, понимаете?
Tatiana is aware of this incident and the fact that the question was posed, whether they are alive or not. However, she believes that there has been some confusion in the translation and that his actual response, as kind of translated into English, was, I believe they may be alive. It's, I hope that they are alive. It's less definite in Russian, the word itself, than it is in English.
Я хотела бы еще сказать, напомнить о том, что российские власти занимались этим вопросом, но это было только в самом-самом начале, после событий 2002 года. В 2003 году Государственная Дума провела 2 слушания по ситуации с правами человека в Туркменистане.
Also in начале 2003.
Да, ну, в течение 2003-го дважды.
In 2003, also the Russian government had initiated some discussions and some conversations with Turkmenistan on behalf of its citizens, Boris Shikhmuradov and Batyr Berdiev, about the question of these prisoners, and that it had 2 hearings at the Duma about this issue.
Дело в том, что туркменские власти изначально обвиняли Российскую Федерацию в пособничестве этим террористам.
The problem also is that the Turkmen government initially blamed the Russian government in complicity in this so-called terrorist act.
В этом заседании принимали участие председатели комитетов Государственной Думы по безопасности, по делам СНГ и ряд других высокопоставленных чиновников, и также был приглашен представитель Министерства иностранных дел Российской Федерации. Дело в том, что многие люди, осужденные Ниязовским режимом в то время, являлись либо гражданами Российской Федерации, либо имеющими двойное гражданство.
At these hearings, there were kind of high-level officials from the Ministry of Security, from the ministry involving the CIS, and other important representatives, including the Minister of External Affairs. And this is because Boris Shikhmuradov and others were either Russian citizens or had dual citizenship between Russian and Turkmen.
И всех поразил, всех присутствующих, я знаю об этом из их бесед с этими людьми, их поразил ответ этого представителя Министерства иностранных дел Российской Федерации, который сказал, что мы регулярно посылаем ноты, на которые туркменский МИД вообще никак не отвечает. Просто Туркменистан занял такую позицию. Дело в том, что если только вынудить их начать какой-то диалог, какой-то отвечать на вопросы, то им не поздоровится в этом плане, потому что все там шито, как по-русски говорят, белыми нитками.
And everybody at these hearings was also surprised by the representative of the Ministry of External Affairs of the Russian Federation, when he said that the ministry regularly sends notes and appeals and letters to the government of Turkmenistan, but the government of Turkmenistan just ignores them and does not answer at all. And they believe that this is because if Turkmenistan went into dialogue or started discussions about this specific issue, the whole thing would unravel because, as they say, the saying is in Russia that things are sewn with white threads, that so much would get exposed that they just cannot even start the conversations on this.
В течение 2 лет я регулярно направляла письма в Министерство иностранных дел с просьбой помочь мне получить сведения о муже. 2 года я не получала ответа, вообще никакого ответа. Министерство иностранных дел Российской Федерации ответило на мои письма только после того, как жалоба была мной направлена в администрацию президента Российской Федерации, из администрации в МИД, и только тогда МИД ответил мне, через 2 года.
In the course of 2 years, Tatiana sent appeals and letters to the Ministry of External Affairs of the Russian Federation, and the ministry had not replied to any of her appeals or letters in the course of 2 years. The only time that she got responses when she sent a letter to the office of the president of the Russian Federation, and the office of the president forwarded that letter to the Ministry of External Affairs, and only then did they reply.
Просто дело в том, что ничего конкретного все равно в этих ответах не было. Мне сообщили, что туркменскую сторону запрашивают, но ответа не получают.
But even in these replies, there was nothing concrete that she got. The Ministry of External Affairs said that the ministry appeals to the government of Turkmenistan, but they never received any responses.
There was a question here.
Hi, Valentina Lukin, Global Voices Online. I have a question, I think, to all of you. How is exile involved in those processes as source of information, or do they offer any help to find out more about prisoners in Turkmenistan? Thank you.
You mean people living in exile? Yes. Very helpful, actually.
Crucial.
Yeah, absolutely critical. Because there's such a culture of fear inside the country, most of our information comes from outside, because people who are still obviously living inside the country are in a very vulnerable position. even so, when we talk to people who are living in exile, many of them have family members who are inside the country. So we need to be extremely careful about any information that we get and ways that we meet. I mean, the whole thing, again, is getting back to the question of trust that Rachel raised earlier. It's a very fragile and a very vulnerable relationship. And but having said that, they're absolutely critical to obtaining information and maintaining, the ties that we have.
There was a question from, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, just to add one thing. Those that are brave enough to publicly speak out in exile often do so at OSCE meetings, as I mentioned before, and I think that's one of the reasons why Turkmenistan is one of the most active and outspoken countries working to try to limit NGO participation at NGO meetings, and in fact has complained about specific individuals and tried to get them barred, thankfully unsuccessfully, from OSCE meetings.
I'd say also that's why the Turkmen government consistently goes after relatives of exiles who remain in the country. Routinely, mercilessly, various kinds of humiliation, bullying, refusing to let them leave the country. So I think the authorities realize the role that exiles play in keeping the world informed about what happens inside the country.
Okay, thank you. There's Liz.
Thank you very much. I was interested to know whether, despite the pressure that they are under, family members of the disappeared have tried to form organizations. Some may be living in repressive countries, Russia clearly, some of the family members in the report, Armenia and other places, and then certainly in the West. The ones in the West can clearly be under pressure because of the threats to their family members left back at home. But whether it has been possible in the past, I mention this because knowing that in other countries, groups of the family members of the disappeareds have been able to keep alive the question and asking the question over and over again, not as only as individuals, but as a group, supporting one another, marking anniversaries, trying to formulate different standards for a future society when the nightmare is over, and that's different from an NGO. That's a group of people who have something in common and can speak in their own voice about what they've suffered and try to educate their own countrymen now and in the future. And I wonder if that's been possible. Thanks.
К сожалению, во-первых, очень затруднена моя связь с теми людьми, которые находятся в Туркменистане, даже учитывая то, что среди заключенных, кроме моего мужа, также его родной брат и племянник этого брата, то есть там из нашей семьи как минимум 3. Но, к сожалению, мы не можем по телефону, мы не можем это обсуждать. Я знаю, что встречаются женщины, да, встречаются, но дело в том, что те люди, которые находятся там, они очень боятся, потому что они видят те последствия, которые имеют вот эти вот отношения, их встречи. И, поэтому я думаю, что нет, я думаю, что это невозможно.
She doesn't think it's possible because even though in her family there's at least 3 people that are still inside the country, and there are sometimes you hear of the wives or the children of the imprisoned, they are so scared to take any action or to even speak or to in any way raise this issue that the communication itself is very difficult to foster.
Известны факты о том, что к моменту приезда того или иного представителя или международной организации, или представителя Госдепартамента и организации ОБСЕ Люди, которые имеют отношение к семьям заключенных, жены, дети, они берутся под дополнительные какие-то меры охраны и не допускаются к встрече личной. А те вопросы, которые они пытаются задать представителям этих организаций там уже в Ашхабаде, как правило, не имеют результата. Не имеют результата.
It's also a known fact that when various representatives of various international organizations make visits to Turkmenistan, to Ashgabat, the family members of those imprisoned, of political prisoners, are under heavy security, of additional security, and so they are in no way able to make any connection. And then also when these representatives raise any questions about these issues to the representatives of the government of Turkmenistan, those questions are never answered.
Достаточно сказать, что представительство Организации по безопасности и сотрудничеству в Европе, ОБСЕ, они находятся в одном здании с Комитетом национальной безопасности.
It's a fact. It's an ironic fact that the building of the representative of the OSCE, they are in the same building as the Ministry of National Security of Turkmenistan. So that's a limitation in itself.
I add one thing? Yeah, sure. Just one other thing to strengthen what Tatiana said. Part of what happened in the punishment of these individuals was actually punishment to their families inside Turkmenistan. And in many cases, their families were exiled from Ashgabat for a certain amount of time. They were not allowed to work. Their children were not allowed to go to school. And because of the punishment of those associated with these people, their friends or other people didn't even want to have anything to do with them. Their children weren't allowed to play with their children. People were so terrified, they just couldn't even have normal contact with these people.
You have to, I think it's useful to think about what kind of status you have as a family of someone who's put in prison for political reasons.
I thought we only met in exile. I don't expect anyone
Oh, okay.
people in Paris and New York.
Oh.
Good point. It's a good question. I'm not really sure. There are certainly exile groups. I'm not sure about sort of victims groups. There are exiles that have formed NGOs outside. There's no question about that. There's a question here from Carl.
Hi. My question has to do with the issue of broadening awareness of the issue, which I think is done by the Prove They Are Alive campaign as an initiative. But, you know, the issues that we're talking about are not issues that are really on the international agenda the way human rights problems in other very repressive small countries like North Korea or Cuba are on the international agenda. And so I guess my question has, maybe let me raise two points. One is, can you identify any events or by international organizations to recognize human rights victims or activists in Turkmenistan? Or, you know, they could be events that were held or awards, honors, and so forth that would be a demonstration of the concern of international organizations. Are there examples of that you can point to, or any initiatives that have been taken? And the second is that even though Turkmenistan is technically an Asian country, being part of Central Asia, it's part of the OSCE, and because it was part of the former Soviet Union, is seen more as part of a Western international organization, which would raise the issues than anything else. And I think when Mr. Bigas mentioned 11 countries that had raised issues, I think they were all part of the OSCE, if I'm not mistaken. And my question is, are there any other countries that Turkmenistan has relations with, which if either the government or people in the country raise the issue, it might get the attention of the government of Turkmenistan, especially in Asia? I know that obviously probably China is a country that has good relations, and we don't expect much there, but other countries like Mongolia or Korea, maybe, who knows, Southeast Asian countries, and whether it makes any sense to get networks of activists in Asian countries to raise the issue is sort of broadening the spectrum of international actors that are preoccupied with the situation and are concerned about it.
Thank you. Yeah, please. Well, first I want to say that for many years, I've been trying to raise attention to Turkmenistan as this country of extraordinary repression. And I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but we talked about how, Turkmenistan is obscure still. It's as obscure as it is repressive. In some ways, Niyazov's grotesque personality cults helped the obscurity issue, but unfortunately, when he was building these golden statues to himself, most international attention was to that, and it sort of became an object of the country was more an object of tittering and ha ha ha, and then people mainly overlooking the atrocities that were happening inside. I think that one thing that we're trying to do is to raise Turkmenistan's profile. We're always trying to do it in the public sphere, and I think that the Prove They Are Alive campaign is a great way to do that. The second thing is we're trying to raise Turkmenistan's profile in the UN system. Turkmenistan very much values its membership in the UN. It's probably the only intergovernmental organization it actually cooperates with. It's starting to, cooperate with the treaty body compliance. It went to, UPR. It's important. Its membership is important to the government, and yet there's been UN Human Rights Council attention focused on many other countries that are not as repressive as Turkmenistan, and we think it's time for Turkmenistan to become more prominent on the UN's agenda. And so one thing that Human Rights Watch, together with other international human rights organizations, is doing is we're trying to work up the ladder of recognition, or work up the ladder of notoriety at the UN Human Rights Council, starting by getting countries, first by talking to delegations, and then maybe by getting countries to talk more about Turkmenistan in their statements, and then we can work up from there. There are a number of different steps that Human Rights Council can do. And we're eager to really push that. Unfortunately, there are also many other issues on the Human Rights Council agenda, but Turkmenistan really deserves to be a priority item. So that's one forum, because it's really surprising. You would think that in a forum like the UN and the Human Rights Council, that everybody there, that all the delegations would know about Turkmenistan, would know what the human rights record there is like, but they don't. Seasoned diplomats don't know. So I think if the seasoned diplomats don't know, then how can we expect the public to know? So I think we have to work in those two prongs. About countries, other countries where Turkmenistan has relations, where important relationships, where we can do more outreach. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think you're right. Unfortunately, China is probably the country that in Asia where Turkmenistan has the most important economic and other relations. And I don't know that that's a productive place for us to start. But I think definitely Korea and Japan. It's just a matter of time and energy. Maybe Tatiana.
Has there ever been an international conference on human rights in Turkmenistan?
No, why don't you organize one?
There have been working groups. We've had various working. There's an annual Turkmenistan working group, but that's closed, small and closed. Some kind of, and its purpose is to let people meet confidentially. There's never been a big event. Did you want to? to comment.
Я хотела бы добавить, что обратить внимание на то, что Туркменистан, провозгласивший свой нейтралитет, он не является членом ни одной международной организации, за исключением СНГ, и то являясь ассоциативным членом.
She just also wants to bring your attention to the fact that because Turkmenistan declared its neutrality, it's not party to any international organizations, with the exceptions of the CIS, but also by association, not really even formally.
Поэтому у представителей международной общественности, общественных организаций, политических организаций, военных организаций нет инструмента воздействия на власти Туркменистана.
Thus, representatives of various international regional organizations, military organizations, thematic organizations, they don't have any mechanisms for influencing the country.
Я хотела бы отметить, что внутри СНГ подписан договор о взаимном розыске лиц, то есть тех лиц, которые уклоняются от уголовной ответственности, а также лиц исчезнувших.
She also wants to highlight the fact that between the countries of the CIS, there's an agreement about searches for various individuals, either those who are running from the law or those that have disappeared. And
на днях Государственная Дума Российской Федерации ратифицировала этот договор.
In the last few days, the Duma of the Russian Federation ratified this agreement.
Но этот договор не был подписан двумя странами, Украиной и Туркменистаном. Поэтому возможности даже таким образом делать запросы о розыске лиц исчезнувших, вот таких как мой муж и как его друзья, товарищи его, возможности даже нет такой.
Yeah, and the only two countries that haven't signed this agreement are Ukraine and Turkmenistan. Thus, Tatiana and other family members or organizations or whatnot, they don't even have this mechanism of looking for those disappeared, including her husband and other political prisoners.
Okay, thank you. There's one last question in the back, the young lady who was waiting very patiently, or did you rethink your, did you want to ask a question? Yeah. No? You're, okay. Oh, okay. Yes, please. And then we'll wrap up since we're already about 5 minutes over. I just wanted to get any last thoughts in.
I wanted to ask 2 questions, I guess. Can be short. One in regards to people, Turkmens that are here in United States. There's a big community now of Turkmens here. Anything has been done for them to try to organize them into something? Because, we're not going to unite ourselves because we're kind of sporadic and also not really kind of reluctant to do things together. But in other ways, U.S. has been bringing organizations, projects into Turkmenistan, so you are doing something in Turkmenistan. But is there anything outside or in U.S. for Turkmens to kind of start doing some kind of activities together? And second question is, in the past, Turkmenistan has been pulling students out of the planes. Also, last year there was an incident where, I'm sorry, I get a little nervous. Incident where the women were pulled out and they were made, stripped down and everything. Is U.S., OSCE, UN, have they done anything on that in regards to that, I guess?
Does anyone know about Turkmen groups in the United States? Should I try to? I'm not aware of Turkmen groups in the United States. Occasionally people come through, just speaking from the net and kind of meeting people occasionally. They're students, and they might, they might touch base with us, but don't really form organizations or I'm not aware of much of a diaspora. I think I know a couple of Turkmens living in the DC area, but
in Turkmenistan, American Embassy has been, USA, I guess, has been doing the projects and different things that, has helped, but at the same time, you guys have been cleaning out now, out of like Eurasia clothes, international, all of those projects basically closed. So anything outside that you thought about, I guess.
I don't know if anyone else wants to take that. Did you want to?
Well, it's, yeah, well, in terms of organizing Turkmen outside of Turkmenistan, it's hard to do that if that's not coming from the community itself. That would be much easier to do if. And can you tell why are Turkmen reluctant to organize?
But if you know, it's the same thing like you're. I'm sorry, I'm a little not, because I get nervous, I'm not really good at explaining things. But when you are in Turkmenistan, you're able to do projects, right? So you're not worried that they're going to get in trouble or anything. They're working, doing projects with you. They're not doing directly associated to like human rights something or anything like that that would be more prohibited in Turkmenistan. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that would you try to organize something for Turkmens outside of Turkmenistan, basically? Maybe that way you could get the Turkmen community unite. Indirectly, you know.
Well, I think there may be projects for human rights or advocacy or NGO training that would be organized outside of Turkmenistan. But as far as organizing Turkmen citizens for political action, that's something beyond what we would do.
All right, I think we're actually out of time, and I just want to kind of give people a last opportunity to wrap up. I know that Kate and Tatiana wanted to make just a couple of comments. On civil society things, it sounds like I am probably the last person to have been in Turkmenistan, which was in 2006, I mean, among our organizations. And there were a few things going on, most of them very social, very like community organizing. I actually visited with ABA. ABA was there then, and ICNL was there, and I think both are now gone. So it's true that things are even the few things that were there when I visited are going away, which is unfortunate. Thank you, everybody. I will let Kate and Tatiana speak a little bit, maybe also what your next stages of the campaign, and then we'll end.
Just very briefly, again, I want to thank Ned for organizing this event and for hosting us. It's really important for us to have the opportunity actually to be able to talk about the campaign. So we're very grateful to you. I also wanted just to say that if anyone has information about the disappeared or about people inside Turkmenistan who may be in the prison system, we have an email address. All of the information is in the materials that are in the back, but we encourage you to contact us. You can do it anonymously. We have a Prove They Are Alive email. Information can be sent there. So if anyone is in contact with people who might have information or who know themselves about the disappeared, we would be very, very grateful for any information that you might be able to bring to us. The next steps of the campaign are really to go more public, to try and do some of the things that some of you in the audience asked us about, to get more awareness about Turkmenistan, to get more awareness about this situation, to maybe draw more on the experiences from other parts of the world. The disappeared in South America, for example, is there's some really good models that we can look to for getting a broader kind of, not even civil society, but just public support for the campaign. So that's where we're heading, and we would be very pleased to have your participation and support and cooperation. So if anyone's interested, please talk to us. Thank you.
Я хотела бы поблагодарить всех участников сегодняшней встречи за внимание, за участие. И хочу сказать, что вот сейчас, по истечении практически 12 лет, вот для меня, например, время эмоций уже прошло.
She just wants to thank all of you for being here, for listening and participating in this event. And she just wants to say that after 12 years, the time of emotions has really passed.
Именно поэтому вот в своем выступлении я делала упор на то, что туркменская сторона нарушает закон, что все события, произошедшие после 25 ноября, являются нарушением и международных норм, и внутреннего законодательства.
And thus, in her statements, she really made an effort to stress the fact that what Turkmenistan is doing is not only outside of its own legal norms, but violates international legal standards and norms.
А те, кто знаком с рассмотрением, с результатами рассмотрения ситуации в Туркменистане, обратили, наверное, внимание на то, что туркменская сторона на любое замечание отвечает: у нас принят закон о том-то, том-то. То есть законодательство Туркменистана, оно идеальное.
So if whoever is familiar with the way that things work in engagement with Turkmenistan, you might also be familiar with the fact that whenever an appeal is sent or something, the government party always replies, we have this law and that law, and our laws are pretty much ideal.
И поэтому я думаю, что основной упор нужно сделать на том, чтобы настаивать именно на соблюдении этих законов и требовать этого от туркменской стороны.
And thus I think that the main stress, the main efforts that we should be doing is ensuring that Turkmenistan abides by its own laws, and make sure that we are doing monitoring with relation to that.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists, especially to Tatiana, for coming to talk about these issues. And thank you all, and we will try to keep working on this campaign.